Energy Basic, Forms of Energy, and Introduction. Let's get started by looking at the different types of energy. Online classes are great because you can take them when and where you want, but I wish you were here. If you were, I'd share my now and later candy with you. Why now and later? Because it will help you remember the two different types of energy, kinetic and potential. The kinetic is the now candy, the potential is the later. I use the now and later candy example to help you meet our first learning objective for this unit. Material explaining the other objectives listed here will be covered later. You should be able to do all of these before you take your unit exam. Before we try to define energy, let's get a better understanding of the many different forms it can take. If you need more time to read these slides, feel free to pause your video at any time. For my workshops, I made a master listing many different forms of energy that could be copied on a sheet of address labels. I stuck each label on the back of a piece of paper to make forms of energy flashcards. Participants drew the images and used them to quiz each other. The pictures they drew sometimes shared information about their interests or backgrounds. This would be a neat activity for you to do with your new students to get to know them better. These are the 9 forms of energy taught to intermediate students from the Need Science of Energy booklet. You may use them to identify the forms of energy on the following slides. Here are 3 images that showcase Iowa. Do these illustrate kinetic or potential energy? Since they are all now, not later, we'll call them kinetic energy. Although that basketball is ready to fall, so it could have some gravitational potential energy too. I chose these 3 because they all show motion energy. What form of energy is shown by the glowing red element on the stove, or the sonar detecting the submarine? The former submariner, now teacher, was showing us sound energy. The educator who loves to cook was illustrating radiant energy. Perhaps you thought the stove was showing thermal energy? Yes, it was. The heating element possesses thermal energy, which it radiates in the form of infrared waves. As you can see, this can get a little complicated. Here are 2 more illustrations of forms of energy for you to identify. The artist of the picture on the left has given you some clues. Focus on the rock at the top of the cliff. Both of these illustrate gravitational potential energy. Of course, there are other types of energy in the pictures. The trees represent stored chemical energy. The falling water at the dam could illustrate energy of motion. If you or your students recognize these other elements, that's a good indication that you have mastered this objective. These 2 objects are about the same size in the real world. If you don't recognize the one on the left, I'll give you a hint. It is used by many campers to make s'mores. All foods, in fact all plant life, is an example of stored chemical energy. Later, we'll review how plants can use photosynthesis to change the energy in sunlight into the bonds that hold sugar molecules together, like the molecules in this Hershey's chocolate bar. I'm sure you all recognize the example of sound energy on the right. This is the last example from my grandson. I think you'll need a hint for it, so here is a related picture from one of my teachers. The drawn bow is an example of elastic energy. That flying arrow headed for the target has energy of motion. There might be a little thermal and sound energy too. I hope these examples have been a good review of the forms of energy for you. And now it's your turn. For your assignment, you'll create a drawing, riddle, or video demonstrating a form of energy. Include why you chose this particular example so we can learn a little bit about you. Finally, we'll need a coded answer. Please use these numbers to code your answers. I've randomly assigned them so the answer won't be real obvious. Feel free to ask each other about the details used to describe the energy form on our discussion page. Before you post your form of energy, you may want to do the reading assignment. These materials are all available in the Educators section at need.org. We're using the Science of Energy booklets, and the kinetic energy and potential energy graphics that I used are in the elementary version on pages 40 and 42. There is also a nice summary of the 9 forms on page 45 of the intermediate version. Both the elementary and intermediate versions have great activities showing how the forms of energy change. This concludes our introduction to forms of energy. Do these assignments and join me again for our next module. You need to read the teacher guide section of the NEED elementary or intermediate Science of Energy booklets. Create a riddle, drawing, or video that describes a form of energy and post it along with a coded answer. And take the Forms of Energy quiz.